Welcome back guys to this channel. Today's game is from the very strong Shamkir Chess Super Tournament, otherwise known as the Gashimov Memorial, which was established in memory of Vygar Gashimov, the Azerbaijan Grandmaster who helped to popularize chess in his home country. He passed away at a very young age, just 27 years old, due to a brain tumor. So this game was from the 5th round. There were a couple of victories in this round, but I've decided to cover this game since the other decisive games have already been covered by other YouTube channels. So we have Grischuk here with white against Vasilin Topalov. This was quite a long game, so I'll be going over the opening stages of the game rather quickly. So without further ado, d4 from Grischuk, knight f6, c4, e6, East Indian defense, knight to f3, d5, so transposing to the queen's gambit decline. So knight to c3, bishop e7, bishop f4, castles from black, e3, knight b to d7, bishop e2, pawn takes c4, castles, and c5, so black puts more pressure on the center. So white decides to resolve that tension immediately. And here he played bishop takes c4, regaining the pawn, b6, black prepares to fianchetto his bishop, and queen to c2, so this was the new move in the position. Previously queen e2 has been played. So here bishop b7, white develops his rook with tempo on the queen, and knight to b5, so trying to win the bishop pair. So black allowed that with a6. So rook to d8, we have rook a to c1, knight to e4, knight c to e4, bishop back to b4, rook captures, queen to e8, stepping out of the c file, bishop back to e2, rook d8, queen comes to b3, bishop d5, once again attacking the queen, also centralizing the bishop, queen to a3, a5, bishop back to e1, and here h6, so this makes room for the king, but perhaps this was a bit too calm. So instead black could have tried the move e5, just to take away the square from the knight, because after h6, Grischuk goes knight e5. We have rook c8, b3, so just protecting the rook. Rook captures c1, queen takes c1, queen to b8, queen b2 protecting the knight. Now knight to c5. So simply stepping out of this potential advance in the center from white, and Topalov is also getting ready to challenge Grischuk's knight on e5. So here Grischuk played f3, knight after d7, and bishop g3, so protecting the knight, and also threatening some discoveries since the bishop is in line with the queen. So here queen to c8. So here taking the knight. After bishop takes e5, this comes with a double attack on the queen and the pawn on g7, forcing queen to f8, but it's unnecessary to allow such pressure from white on the long diagonal. So here Topalov plays queen to c8, simply stepping out of the bishop's line. We have knight to c4, Topalov played bishop takes c4. So my guess was that Topalov didn't want to allow the knight to come into the b5 square via a3 or d6, so he played bishop takes c4. So we have two bishops versus two knights. Queen to c6 and queen to e2 from Grischuk. So Grischuk didn't want to allow this b5 advance. And here Topalov played f6. So this weakens the e6 pawn. However, white has no immediate way of exploiting this. So with f6 being played, it makes sense that black should try to get in, if possible, this move b5 to kick away the bishop. So here Grischuk played bishop b5, queen d5, bishop c4, queen back to c6, and queen b2. So Grischuk decides not to repeat moves, and he now wants to improve the position of his queen. He is allowing Topalov to push b5 in this position. And after bishop to f1, maybe even b4. This might make things more difficult for Grischuk. So b4 gives Topalov access to the c3 square to latch onto with a knight or a queen. And if the bishop comes back to c4, here black can play knight b6 and challenge the bishop. So b5 is a possibility for black, but Topalov decides not to go for this idea. He plays king to f7, so giving more protection to e6. Grischuk goes h3, we have knight b7, queen d4, Grischuk improves the queen, king e7, king g4, so the king has to come back to defend the pawn, king h2, knight d to c5, and here a3 from Grischuk. So this is a very tricky move. Grischuk is kind of baiting Topalov into playing b5, and after the bishop retreats, hoping for knight takes b3, and this is met with queen h5 check. Also comes with a double attack on the pawn, and after king f8, bishop takes b5, queen c8, queen g6, where white would have a strong initiative with the two bishops in an open position. So with that being said, b5 is still a good move for Topalov, since it takes away some pressure off the e6 pawn, but it shouldn't be followed up with knight takes b3. Black can instead try knight d6, which gives more protection to b5. In the game we see the move g6 from Topalov, so he wants to take away the h5 square from the queen, but this is very risky since it now exposes the king on the 7th rank. This also allows the bishop to remain on this diagonal where it pressures the e6 pawn, allowing for some tactical possibilities. And here Grischuk takes advantage of black's failure to play b5. He plays b4. So here a takes b4, a takes b4, and if the knight retreats, then b5 is very strong. So you can see how powerful this bishop is, stopping queen d6, so black has to play queen c8, allowing now queen takes e6, and this is going to be great for Grischuk. So here Topalov had to throw in h5, which further weakens the king. We have knight d7 from Topalov, and here Grischuk wants to infiltrate with his queen, but doing so would leave the bishop on c4 hanging. So he first plays bishop to a6. There is also the threat of going queen c7. For example, let's make a waiting move. Let's say king g7. Then here queen c7. This has to be taken. And here the knight is simply trapped. So Topalov goes knight d8, and you can see that black's knights are very awkward in this position. And white is simply better because he has the two bishops in an open position. So now queen to h6, knight to f8, stopping queen h7, and bishop d3. So Topalov now probably regretting his decision of pushing his pawns, and Grischuk looks menacingly at g6. The threat now is to play bishop takes g6, and after knight captures, queen h7 check, followed by picking up the knight. So Topalov had to make another pawn move. To stop this, he played f5. And Grischuk tries to further open up the king. Queen d7 from Topalov. So after the game, Grischuk said, and I quote him, "I think nobody will beat the computer in this position. Maybe Magnus at his best, Kasparov when he was young, and maybe Botvinnik because he will adjourn the game." Well, he might be right, but for a human this is very unpleasant to defend. Grischuk goes queen to e3. So he has probed enough weaknesses on the king side, and he now attacks the b6 pawn. So that was defended. And once again, black can't defend with queen d6 because of this very annoying bishop. So queen c6, allowing Grischuk to centralize his queen. So keeping tabs on b6 and also looking at the weak dark squares around black's king. Topalov tries to trade queens, but Grischuk avoids that. And here g5, so probably worried about bishop h4. And now Grischuk further exposes the king. So queen comes into position, king g6, bishop e5, queen e7. And amazingly, Topalov is just about surviving in this position. So after the game, the move g4 was suggested. But Grischuk wasn't sure if this would lead to a winning position. So he tried queen g8 check, queen d5, and queen d7 from Topalov. So Grischuk could allow the queens to be traded here with queen d4 that also attacks b6. And this is probably winning for Grischuk, as white will have decent pressure on the b-pawn, and black's knights seem just uncoordinated at the moment. Plus having the two bishops is always nice. So queen d4 was a possibility for Grischuk, but here he played bishop d6, which is quite understandable. White wants to keep the queens on the board since black's king is pretty exposed, but this allows black to get some footing in the position. So here he plays knight f to e6. So you can see that this pin is a bit awkward. Grischuk wants to play bishop b5, but that would run into knight c7. So he plays queen to e5, unpinning the bishop. And now h4, so black is starting to get some play. This knight might come to the f4 square, which cannot be chased away with g3 because of the pawn. So here we have bishop b5, queen to c8, queen to d5. So here Topalov could have played knight to f4. This would have kept the game unclear. This also creates some chances for black to land the queen on g3, although highly unlikely, but it's possible. And here if bishop takes f4, this does win a pawn, but doesn't look like an easy win to convert. So knight to f4 could have been played, but here queen to c3, so perhaps overambitious from Topalov. Topalov missed his chance, and now Grischuk seizes the initiative, bishop e8 check. So if this is taken, queen takes e6, and queen takes e8. So here king to h7, this forces the king to a bad square, because if king to f6, then queen b7 is very strong. So this threatens mate on e7 and f7. And if knight takes, queen e8 check. And in this position, white is simply up a whole piece. And if king to h6, we have bishop to e5, and if queen takes b4, bishop f7, queen has to come back and defend. And now bishop takes g7, queen c6. Here knight to e6 is forced, because if king h7, queen g6 check, and queen h6 mate. So black has to go king h7, and now bishop d7. So this has to be defended. Queen to e1 from Topalov, and now bishop e5 from Grischuk, cutting off the defense. Topalov tried f4, so hoping for a perpetual with queen g3 to e1, but Grischuk stops that. He plays queen d3 check, king h6, and now bishop to c3, so controlling the e1 square, and therefore stopping the perpetual. So we have queen to e3, queen c4. White's bishops dominate in the open board, while black's knights are rather clumsy in this position, stepping on each other's toes. The only piece that can really move here for black is his king. So this knight can't really move because it has to protect the knight on e6. The queen also has to keep watch of the knight. And if black moves this knight, for example knight d8, then bishop f6, well, let's first take a look at what happens on queen to e1. So here bishop takes knight, black can give a few checks, but here this would result in white being up an extra pass pawn, and this is probably winning. And on knight d to e6, white can go queen c6, so threatening to play bishop takes g7 to win a piece. So king h7, bishop takes, queen takes, so here if knight takes, queen to e8 gives white pretty nice initiative. And on queen takes e6, b5, and here black is kind of in zugzwang. So you can't capture the queen because of pawn takes, and this pawn is going to be very dangerous. So if the queen moves, for example, queen to e3, then queen c7, taking advantage of the pin. So if the king moves, for example, king g8 instead of queen e3, then your bishop takes g7, removing the defender of the queen. And if queen takes, and here you're not in time to stop the pawn. And if instead of king g8, I forgot to mention what happens on queen to e1. So here bishop to c3 takes away any perpetual from black by controlling the e1 square, and after queen to e7, queen takes b6, and white has the advantage. So let's go back. Topalov tried king to g6, bishop c6, king f7, so Topalov brings the king back towards the center to free up the knight. But here comes bishop d5, so this is a very annoying pin. Knight to e8 plate, and bishop d4. Nicely centralized bishops, so this also comes with a fork on the queen and the pawn on b6. So Topalov, he tried b5, hoping for bishop takes and pawn takes, but here Grischuk played queen to c6. And in this position, Vesely and Topalov resign. So if queen takes d4, queen takes e6, and this is going to be disastrous. So here the knight is hanging. White is also threatening mate on g6 and h7. And if queen to e1, then queen d7 check, and queen takes e8. So a nice win for Alexander Grischuk after his loss in round 2 against Ding Liren. So I hope you enjoyed this game, and as usual, if you enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great day.